So I want to try to break down the recent Putin interview, especially the first 30 minutes where he's just talking about Russian history, basically, because it's really interesting, and I know that part is probably going over so many people's heads. Obviously, the memes make that extremely clear. So let's just go ahead and jump into it, and I will try my best to explain exactly what he's talking about. There's so much to really discuss here. Let's just go into it.
Mr. President, thank you. On February 22nd, 2022,
so he's going to go, like, he's basically talking for 30 minutes about Russian history to justify his point in why basically Ukraine is Russian lands. I'm guessing that was his methodology here to argue his point of why he did the invasion, things like that. So he's going to go way back into the very origin story of Russia and Ukraine, and I guess that's why he goes on for 30 minutes. But there is I think a solid telling of, like, we start at some of the really early beginnings of Russia, and he goes chronologically all the way until World War II, the Cold War, even recent times. So I think the way that he does explain the history is easy to follow along, but again, I can see why it still kind of goes over a lot of Americans' heads for sure. I'm sure everyone, as soon as he started talking history, everyone just immediately went, just immediately passed out. They did not want to, even talk about it or interview it. And I'm sure there's probably the whole translation here, I think, confuses people a bit. They don't want to listen to, okay, let's just go into it.
Country in a nationwide address when the conflict in Ukraine started. And you said that you were acting because you had come to the conclusion that the United States, through NATO, might initiate
one thing's for sure is, he definitely knows a lot about history.
And to American ears, that sounds paranoid. Tell us why you believe.
Not so much Tucker. Actually, there was times here where he made me cringe. I'm just going to be completely honest, like, a very cringeworthy stuff that he just clearly was not prepared to talk the intricate details of Russian history, which, to be fair, I don't really know what, he probably should have known a little bit more than he did.
The United States might strike Russia out of the blue. How did you conclude that?
It's not that America, the United States, was going to launch a surprise strike on Russia. I didn't say that. Are we having a talk show or a serious conversation?
I like how he comes right out of the gate with
Here's
this.
the quote.
In like 1 minute, he starts the history.
It's a formidable series.
It's kind of funny because I find that there is something kind of slightly lost in the translation when it comes to, like, the delivery of the English translator versus actually Putin's face. Like, that was delivered like a very like an immediate jab, but it seemed more like a joke when looking at Putin's face. I don't really know. That's just a random part that I wanted to add. So I wonder
because your basic education is in history, as far as I understand.
Yes.
We're going to see.
So if you don't mind, I will take only 30 seconds or 1 minute to give you a short reference to history for giving you a little historical background.
Please.
And here we go, proceeds to talk for 30 minutes about this subject. I don't know why. Maybe there was something lost, but it's like, no, he was going to break down the history. We're getting into it.
Let's look where our relationship with Ukraine started from. Where did Ukraine come from? The Russian state started gathering itself as a centralized statehood, and it is considered to be the year of the establishment of the Russian state in 862.
862.
When the townspeople of Novgorod invited a Varangian prince, Rurik, from Scandinavia to reign.
Yeah, so we kind of have like some references to the Viking times. Remember, the Vikings went all over the place. I know the big discussion when it comes to Vikings is the Viking invasion of the British Isles and the English and things like that. But the Vikings went everywhere, and they did go deep into modern-day Russian territory. So yeah, we are going to be talking Novgorod and Muscovy, and I believe he gets into the outward expansion, wars, the fights with the Turks, things like that. So here we go.
862 год. В 1862
In 1862, Russia celebrated the 1000th
1862.
anniversary
So
of
this
its
is his
statehood.
justification for Russia starting
And
in
in Novgorod,
800.
there is a memorial dedicated to the 1000th anniversary of the country.
So we're getting,
In 800,
we're going early, and this is obviously where a lot of the memes come from because basically let's start back from the Big Bang. It's funny though because in a way you do kind of have to. You do have to go back. I don't agree with the core of his argument here, but in his mind, I understand where you go back. You do have to go start really far back in his own justification process of it.
182, Rurik's successor, Prince Oleg, who was actually
it
playing
does-
the role
In his eyes, I can see why it makes sense, and I can see why this just goes completely over Tucker's head, basically.
of regent at Rurik's younger son,
По сути, функция регента
because Rurik had died by that time, came to Kiev.
к этому времени пришел в Киев, отстранил от власти двух братьев.
He ousted two brothers who
Crane's
apparently had
Tucker's face here is pretty priceless. It's going to get better and better too as we progress onward. He's just, you can just tell this is not the direction that he thought that they were going to go, but this is still really good information. You still got to eat this stuff up.
Дружины Рюрика,
once been members of Rurik's squad.
имея два центра в Киеве и в Новгороде.
So Russia began to develop with two centers of power, Kiev and Novgorod.
Следующая очень значимая дата в истории
The
России.
next very significant date in the history of Russia was 988.
Владимир это
This was the baptism of Russia, when Prince Vladimir, the great-grandson of Rurik, baptized Russia and adopted Orthodoxy, or Eastern Christianity.
централизованное российское государство.
From this time, the centralized Russian state began to strengthen.
Единая территория.
Why? Because of the single territory, integrated economic ties,
Один язык.
one and the same language, and, after the baptism of Russia,
He's trying to
the
follow.
same faith and rule of the prince. The centralized Russian state began to take shape.
Российское государство.
Back in the Middle Ages, Prince Yaroslav the Wise introduced the order of succession to a throne.
На
So
введение престола
he's
наследия.
basically,
But after he passed away, it became complicated for various reasons.
Чуть-чуть
again, what he's doing, it is he's trying to connect, obviously, a similar origin story, basically. It's just funny. I just find it funny that this is the route that he went. It does make, the funny thing is I know there's a lot of memes that for instance, the big popular one right now is Mongolia, the former Mongolian president or leader tweeting out, well, this is what former the Mongolian Empire looked like in the 1200s. So is there justification for us to take all that stuff back? It's a funny meme. It is a really good meme, but it's really not the same. It's not the same. Even though I don't agree with Putin's argument here, it's still a little bit different with the shared. He's trying to share the connection, the origin story connection, basically. So it's a little bit different than just, or the British Empire, it depends on what you're trying to argue with the British Empire, but yeah.
прошлой жизни.
The throne was passed not directly from father to eldest son, but from the prince who had passed away to his brother, then to his sons in different lines.
Потом сыновьям по разным линиям. Все это привело к
All this led to the fragmentation and the end of Rus as a single state.
раздробленности.
There was nothing special about it. The same was happening then in Europe.
Но раздробленное русское государство
Things like this
стало
did
легкой
happen in Europe.
добычей.
But the fragmented Russian state became an easy prey to the empire created earlier by Genghis Khan.
Хан Баты
Genghis
пришли
Khan, here we
на
go,
Русь,
here goes.
His successors, namely Batu Khan, came to Rus, plundered and ruined nearly all the cities. The southern part, including
Yeah, I mean, again, like I said earlier in a video on my main channel this week, this was like a core part of Russia's DNA. This is really the Hordic wars, basically, that they've had to fight, was really important to the mindset of Russia going on. I mean, it was, Mongolia left a huge impact. The Mongolian Empire and the following hordes after Genghis Khan left a massive impact on the heart and who Russia is, the spirit of Russia. So
Kiev, by the way, and some other cities simply lost independence, while northern cities preserved some of their sovereignty. They had to pay tribute to the horde, but they managed to preserve some part of their sovereignty. And then a unified Russian state began to take shape with its center in Moscow. The southern part of Russian lands, including Kiev, began to gradually gravitate towards another magnet, the center that was emerging in Europe.
I'm just remembering that he's going to start referencing Poland here, and this is going to be really funny. That's a whole other aspect of the memes is Poland started everything. Well, I don't think he phrases it like that, but it almost sounds like he is blaming Poland for a good chunk of a part of history. You'll see.
This was the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. It was even called the Lithuanian-Russian Duchy, because Russians were a significant part of this population.
Remember that Lithuania, I know it's hard to remember nowadays because Lithuania is a very small country in the Baltic area of Europe, but Lithuania used to be massive, really, really big.
They spoke the old Russian language and were Orthodox. But then there was a unification, the union of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland.
Okay, here we go. Here's the Poland stuff.
A few years later, another union was signed, but this time already in the religious sphere. Some of the Orthodox priests became subordinate to the Pope. Thus, these lands became part of the Polish-Lithuanian state.
I want to add that the reason why he's talking about this right now is because Lithuania, Poland, Lithuania, whatever you want to call them, they did control a lot of modern-day Ukrainian lands. So that's why he's talking about. I know it's easy to imagine a map, and you start thinking of like where Lithuania is and Poland is, but this is back in the day when they had very different borders, and so this does make sense. Like this, he is talking about what Ukraine currently controls today at that time, which is Polish-Lithuania.
During decades, the Poles were engaged in Polonization of this part of the population. They introduced their language there, tried to entrench the idea that this population was not exactly Russians, that because they lived on the fringe, they were Ukrainians. Originally, the word Ukrainian meant that a person was living on the outskirts of the state, along the fringes, or was engaged in a border patrol service. It didn't mean...
We're like 7 minutes in, and I can already tell this is not exactly how Tucker thought things were going to go.
In any particular ethnic group. So the Poles were trying to, in every possible way, to colonize this part of the Russian lands, and actually treated it rather harshly, not to say cruelly. All that led to the fact that this part of the Russian lands began to struggle for their rights. They wrote letters to Warsaw demanding that their rights be observed and people be commissioned here, including to Kiev.
I beg your pardon, can you tell us what period? I'm losing track of where in history we are.
Come on, I mean, I don't want to be mean. I'm actually not like the type of person that... I really enjoy history, but I don't like to dunk on people that don't understand history because I get it. It's hard and it's confusing, and even for a lot of Americans, like I get why they are not interested. But I think Tucker here, this interviewer, should have. You gotta kind of follow along, especially as Putin set this up perfectly in the very beginning of the interview when he's like, "Oh, you studied history, right? Okay, bam," and to see Tucker already getting lost 8 minutes in, it's just like. Jeez, I realize that he's in like a certain environment. He's in Moscow. There's maybe a dude behind him with an AK-47, maybe scaring the crap out of him. I don't know, but come on, man, you got to be keeping along here.
The Polish oppression of Ukraine.
It was in the 13th century.
Это было в XIII веке. Значит, и
Now I will
I'm
tell you
assuming,
what
and it's
happened
further
later
on to what he's talking about.
не было путаницы.
and give the dates so that there is no confusion.
В 1600,
And in 1654, even a bit earlier,
чуть раньше даже, люди, которые контролировали
the
власть,
people who were in control of the authority over that part of the Russian lands
чтобы присылали к ним
addressed Warsaw, I repeat, demanding that they send them to rulers of Russian origin and Orthodox faith. When Warsaw did not answer them, and in fact rejected their demands, they turned to Moscow, so that Moscow took them away.
чтобы
I'm sure an aspect of Tucker's confusion here is that he's trying to listen to Putin as well as get the communication through his ear, the English translations, things like that. So maybe that's why he's so confused looking.
вы не думали, что я что-то придумал, Дим?
So that you don't think that I'm inventing things,
This part was funny.
I'll give you these
Я вам
documents.
отдам вот эти
Why is he
Well,
so...
it doesn't sound like you're inventing it. I'm not sure why it's relevant to what happened 2 years ago.
Но все-таки
Oh, it totally
But
is.
still,
документы из архива.
These are documents from the archives.
How do you not know? Oh my goodness. How do you not know? Like, it's just, I'm sure this is not what he wanted to talk about. That's part of it. Maybe that's why he said that. Like, I don't know how this is relevant. This is relevant in his eyes. Maybe this is Tucker trying to get, like I said, he's trying to get him off of the history discussion, which they eventually do. But it's a long interview. I do think that this stuff is interesting to see how he is thinking.
Peace.
Здесь письма. Богдана
Here are the letters from Bogdan Khmelnytsky,
контролировал власть в этой
the man who then controlled the power in this part of the Russian lands
в Варшаву.
that is now called Ukraine.
А после того, как
He wrote to Warsaw demanding that their rights be upheld,
с просьбой взять их,
and after being refused, he began to write letters to Moscow, asking to take them under the strong hand of the Moscow Tsar. There are copies of these documents. I will leave them for your good memory.
They're in
There is a
Cyrillic, though.
translation into Russian. You can translate it into English later.
потому что
Oh.
Russia would not agree to admit them straight
I just
away,
love how he's like, you're going to translate it later.
assuming that the war with Poland would start. Nevertheless, in 1654, the Pan-Russian Assembly of top clergy and landowners, headed by the Tsar,
часть древнерусских земель вошла
which was the representative body of the power of the old Russian state, decided to include a part of the old Russian lands into Moscow Kingdom.
перемирие было заключено.
As expected, the war with Poland began. It lasted 13 years, and then in 1654,
по-моему,
a
1654,
truce was concluded.
мир с Польшей.
a couple centuries we skipped out there, but
And 32 years later, I think, a peace treaty
so he
with
hits the origin story with the Vikings over in those modern day lands. He talks obviously about the hordes. Now we're talking about the Polish-Lithuania and, probably the collapse of Poland and Russia getting bigger and bigger, the Russian Empire days,
Poland, which they
Soviet
called
Union days. Obviously, we're going to get to that.
eternal
It all is chronological. Yes.
peace was signed.
Отошла к России.
And these lands, the whole left bank of Dnieper, including Kiev, went to Russia.
Затем во времена
And the whole right bank of Dnieper remained in
Россия
Poland.
вернула все исторические земли.
Under the rule of Catherine the Great, Russia reclaimed all of its historical lands, including in the south and west.
Да, а вот
This all lasted until the revolution.
воспользовавшись
Before World War I,
украинизацией,
Austrian General
He's going to skip over the collapse of Poland, but okay.
Staff relied on the ideas of Ukrainianization and started actively promoting the ideas of Ukraine and the Ukrainianization.
в преддверии мировой войны, конечно, было стремление ослабить потенциал.
Their motive was obvious.
Было стремление
Just before World War I, they wanted to weaken the potential enemy and secure themselves favorable conditions in the border area. So the idea which had emerged
Again, I just want to repeat again, I just do not agree with the premise of this argument at all. It's just funny. It is funny. Like I'm following along. It's just I don't agree. There's so many different examples around world history where that you can say shared history, but what does that mean? How does that justify anything? It's crazy.
In Poland, that people residing in that territory were allegedly not really Russians, but rather belonged to a special ethnic group, Ukrainians, started being propagated by the Austrian General Staff. As far back as the 19th century, theorists calling for Ukraine
And Austria-Hungary at that time, before World War I, during World War I, had a ton of ethnic groups, including Ukrainians in there.
independence appeared. All those, however, claimed that Ukraine should have a very good relationship with Russia. They insisted on that. After the 1917 revolution,
So now we're getting into the Russian Revolution, crazy times. Obviously, this is during World War I. This is when they're about to turn communists, turn into the Soviet Union.
the Bolsheviks sought to restore the statehood, and the civil war began, including the hostilities with Poland.
Yes, because there is going to be, I don't know where he is in his mind, but there will be a war with Poland again in the 1920s, and Poland's actually going to win their independence.
In 1921, peace with Poland was proclaimed,
there you go.
and under that treaty, the right bank of Dnieper River once again was given back to Poland.
Remember that these are very different Polish borders that we're talking about here. When Poland got their independence after World War I and in the 1920s, than what they have today. You got to keep that part in mind.
In 1939, after Poland cooperated with Hitler,
I forgot about this part. Okay, that one's that one's fun. You know who else cooperated with Hitler? Russia. The Molotov-Ribbentrop pact. I wonder if Putin just thinks he can kind of like, I don't know. I mean, he knows that Tucker's not going to call him out on some of the things that he's like either leaving out or kind of glossing over. So he's his guard is down. So he's just I don't know. But he's on camera. He's on television. I mean, whatever. You think he'd be more careful.
he did collaborate with Hitler, Hitler offered Poland peace and a treaty of friendship, an alliance demanding in return that Poland give back to Germany the so-called Danzig corridor, which connected the bulk of Germany with East Prussia and Königsberg.
Yeah, because remember at that time in World War II, before it started, Germany did have like an enclave. Unlike in World War I borders, the Imperial German borders, where it was all kind of connected. So that was a big thing for Germany at that time during World War II. They really wanted to reconnect.
After World War I, this territory was transferred to Poland, and instead of Danzig, a city of Dansk emerged. Hitler asked them to give it amicably, but they refused.
Of course.
Still, they collaborated with Hitler and engaged together.
He's really pounding that side in. This is very interesting, because isn't that his argument that Ukraine is no Germans, and I'm guessing this is where it comes from. I don't know. It's hard to imagine. I'm trying my best to figure out what the heck is going on in his mind, but
Partitioning of Czechoslovakia.
But may I ask you, you're making the case that Ukraine, certainly parts of Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, is in effect Russia, has been for hundreds of years. Why wouldn't you just take it when you became president 24 years ago? You have nuclear weapons, they don't. If it's actually your land,
this is Tucker trying to get off the history subject.
I'll tell you. I'm coming to that. This briefing is coming to an end. It might be boring, but it explains
boring.
many things.
I just don't know how it's relevant.
Okay, I mean, it's relevant.
Good. I'm so gratified that you appreciate that. Thank you. So, before World War
It really does feel like there is something lost in translation, though. I do have to admit. I don't know. I've already mentioned that, but it's very different. The voice that I'm hearing and that tone versus, Putin's face a little different.
Two, Poland collaborated with Hitler, and although it did not yield to
time he's mentioned
Hitler's
that.
demands, it still participated in the partitioning of Czechoslovakia together with Hitler, as the Poles had not given the Danzig corridor to Germany and went too far, pushing Hitler to start World War II by attacking them. Why was it Poland against whom the war started on 1st September 1939? Poland turned out to be uncompromising, and Hitler had nothing to do but start implementing his plans with Poland. By the way, the USSR, I have read some archived documents, behaved very honestly. It asked Poland's permission to transit its troops through the Polish territory to help Czechoslovakia. But the then Polish foreign minister said that if the Soviet planes flew over Poland, they would be downed over the territory of Poland. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that the war began, and Poland fell prey to the policies it had pursued against Czechoslovakia, as under the well-known Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
Okay, so there he's going to mention
Part
that.
of the territory, including western Ukraine, was to be given to Russia. Thus, Russia, which was then named the USSR, regained its historical lands. After the victory in the Great Patriotic War, as we call World War II, all those territories were ultimately enshrined as belonging to Russia,
Yes,
to
so
the USSR.
При этой компенсации, так надо полагать.
As for Poland, it received, apparently in compensation, the lands which had originally been German.
Poland has moved historically. It's funny, if you look at the migration of the Polish nation, it's moved further and further west.
Восточную часть
The eastern parts of Germany,
земель.
these are now western lands of Poland.
Сегодня. Ну, естественно, и опять вернули.
Of course, Poland regained access to the Baltic Sea and Danzig,
Вернули Данциг, который опять стал называться.
which was once again given its Polish name.
Вот таким образом сложилось.
So this was how this situation
При
developed.
формировании Советского Союза, это уже 1900.
In
I
1920s,
feel like with his argument, going just, I wonder if like one of his method of obviously this is like a logical fallacy. If you've looked up, if you've ever taken a class about stuff like that, appeal to tradition. Apparently, like this is a classic logical. It's just a classic fallacy, the appeal to tradition. Like, oh, this is how it is. This is how it should be. So he uses 35 minutes here basically to justify when that's not, that doesn't work. You've wasted 35 minutes now, whatever. It's interesting to watch on camera, though, I will admit. I
too,
do.
when the USSR was
funny.
being established,
Большевики начали формировать
the
СССР.
Bolsheviks started building the USSR and established the Soviet Ukraine, which had never existed before.
Right.
Который до сих пор вообще не существовало. При этом Сталин
Stalin insisted that those republics be included in the USSR as
входили в качестве автономных образований.
autonomous entities.
Основатель советского государства Ленин настоял.
For some inexplicable reason, Lenin, the founder of the Soviet state, insisted that they be entitled to withdraw from the USSR.
Наделил
And
образующуюся
again,
really
for some
interesting.
unknown reasons, he transferred to that newly established Soviet Republic of Ukraine some of the lands together with people living there. Even
Yeah, this is where a lot of his argument comes to Crimea as well.
though those lands had never been called Ukraine, and yet they were made part of that
Was this the same justification he did in 2014 when Russia took Crimea? Basically, this exact argument here.
Soviet Republic of Ukraine. Those lands included the Black Sea region, which was received under Catherine the Great, and which had no historical connection with Ukraine whatsoever. Even if we go as far back as 1654, when these lands returned to Russian Empire, that territory was the size of 3 to 4 regions of modern Ukraine, with no Black Sea region. That was completely out of the
In
question.
1654.
Exactly.
You obviously have encyclopedic knowledge of this region, but why didn't you make this case
he should.
for the first 22
He's the
years
Russian
as
leader. He better know
president
Russian
that
history really,
Ukraine
really,
wasn't
really
a real
well.
country?
Да. Итак, значит, советская Украина получила
The Soviet Union was given a great deal of territory that had never belonged to it, including the Black Sea region.
Which includes Crimea.
At some point, when Russia received them as an outcome of the Russo-Turkish Wars,
Oh, so he, yeah,
they were
this is when
called
he
New
mentions it.
Russia, or no,
Okay, maybe it doesn't perfectly go in chronological order because now we're coming back a little bit in time when we were like, yeah, he's bouncing around a little bit here.
Россия. But that does not matter. What matters is that Lenin, the founder of the Soviet state, established Ukraine that way. For decades, the Ukrainian Soviet Republic developed as part of the USSR. And for unknown reasons, again, the Bolsheviks were engaged in Ukrainianization. It was not merely because the Soviet leadership was composed to a great extent of those originating from Ukraine. Rather, it was explained by the general policy of indigenization pursued by the Soviet Union. Same things were done in other Soviet republics. This involved promoting national languages and national cultures, which is not bad in principle. That is how the Soviet Ukraine was created. After the World War II,
Soviet
Ukraine
Ukraine.
received, in addition to the lands that had belonged to Poland before the war, part of the lands that had previously belonged to Hungary and Romania. So Romania and Hungary had some of their lands taken away and given to the Soviet Ukraine, and they still remain part of Ukraine. So in this sense, we have every reason to affirm that Ukraine is an artificial state that was shaped at Stalin's will.
Do you believe Hungary has a right to take its land back from Ukraine, and that other nations have a right to go back to their
This is an interesting
1650
argument by
borders?
Tucker here. That's a good way to take it.
I'm not sure whether they should go back to the 1654 borders. But given Stalin's time, so-called Stalin's regime, which as many claim saw numerous violations of human rights and violations of the rights of other states,
Really interesting that he mentions that about Stalin.
one may say that they could claim back those lands of theirs while having no right to do that. It is at least understandable.
Have you told Viktor Orban that he can have part of Ukraine?
Yeah, so he's asking about the current leader of Hungary, like, hey, do you want to split Ukraine with me? You know, like, have you guys been doing some back office talks about, taking your old land back and Romania's old land back? Yeah.
Never. I've never told him, not a single time.
I don't know why he would. That seems like a weird thing that he would. I believe him here that he probably has not talked to him about that.
We have not even had any conversation on that, but I actually know for sure that Hungarians who live there
In Ukraine.
wanted to get back to their historical land. Moreover, I would like to share a very interesting story with you. I digress. It's a personal
That's where the eye meme comes from, where he's like a little confused.
one. Somewhere in the early 80s, I went on a road trip in a car from then Leningrad.
So he's a former. I don't know if this at this point. I don't know his specific history, but I don't know if he's specifically a KGB agent at this point. He apparently works with KGB.
across the Soviet Union through Kiev. Made a stop in Kiev and then went to western Ukraine.
Again, in the 80s, this was all still Soviet Union territory. Ukraine.
I went to
was
the town
part
of
Soviet Union.
Beregovoye, and all the names of towns and villages there were in Russian and in the language I did not understand, in Hungarian, in Russian and in Hungarian, not in Ukrainian, in Russian and in Hungarian. I was driving through some kind of village and there were men sitting next to the houses and they were wearing black three-piece suits and black cylinder hats. I asked, are they some kind of entertainers? I was told, no, they were not entertainers, they're Hungarians. I said, what are they doing here? What do you mean? This is their land, they live here. This was during the Soviet time in the 1980s. They preserved the Hungarian language, Hungarian names, and all their national costumes. They
That's a
are
very interesting
Hungarians and they
anecdotal
feel themselves to be
story.
Hungarians. And of course, when now there is an infringement,
Well, that is, and there's a lot of that, though. I think many nations are upset about Transylvania as well, as you obviously know. But many nations feel frustrated by the redrawn borders of the wars of the 20th century and wars going back 1,000 years, the ones that you mentioned. But The fact is that you didn't make this case in public until 2
This
years
is an
ago,
interesting
February.
point.
And in the case that you made, which I read today,
Сейчас скажу.
you explain at great length that you felt a physical threat from the West in NATO, including potentially a nuclear threat, and that's what got you to move. Is that a fair?
Tucker's really trying to take this anywhere else. He's trying to go anywhere else, probably because he's not an expert at all on this subject, so he's just trying to take the conversation in any other way.
Characterization of what you said?
Я понимаю, что мои длинные диалоги, они...
I understand that my long speeches probably fall outside of the genre of the interview.
Yeah.
That is why I asked you at the beginning, are we going to have a serious talk or a show? You said a serious talk, so bear with me, please. We're coming to the point where
It's funny because I enjoyed listening to this aspect of the interview. I'm glad that I think it's just interesting to hear his perspective and his take on Russian history and history in general. But yeah, it's funny because that's obviously not maybe the most clickbait worthy. You can't get the greatest sound bites from this part.
the Soviet Ukraine was established. Then, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and everything that Russia had generously bestowed on Ukraine was dragged away by the latter. I'm coming to a very important
This is like the dissolvement of the Soviet Union into all the different states that we see today: Belarus, the Baltic states, Central Asia.
point of today's agenda.
Этот развал Советского Союза...
Thank you.
After all, the collapse of the Soviet Union was effectively initiated by the Russian
Я не
leadership.
знаю, чем тогда руководствовалось руководство России. Но
I do not understand what the Russian leadership was guided by at the time, but I suspect there were several reasons to think everything would be fine.
первое. Ну, во-первых, я думаю, что руководство России исходило из того, что
First,
фундаментальные...
I think that then Russian leadership believed that the fundamentals of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine were, in fact, a common language. More than 90% of the population there spoke Russian.
У каждого третьего какие-то родственные связи.
Family ties. Every third person there had some kind of family or friendship ties. Common culture, common history. Finally, common faith, coexistence with a single state for centuries, and deeply interconnected economies.
Экономика очень сильно взаимосвязана.
This is funny. This is just giving me this is reminding me of the border between the U.S. and Mexico. The Mexican government had California and New Mexico and Texas and all that stuff. And if you're using these same arguments, it doesn't work. Okay, and today we have a ton of people still linked to Mexico. A ton of people speak Spanish. A lot of people can link back their heritage to obviously Mexico. Yet Mexican government has yet to invade the U.S. Based off just those factors.
All of these were so fundamental. All these elements together make our good relationships inevitable.
Я хочу, чтобы вы, как американские гражданины, чтобы
The second point is a very important one.
прежнее российское руководство
I want you, as an American citizen, and your viewers to hear about this as well.
больше никаких разделителей.
The former Russian leadership assumed that the Soviet Union had ceased to exist, and therefore there were no longer any ideological dividing lines.
Инициативно пошла даже на развал Советского Союза.
Russia even agreed voluntarily and proactively to the collapse of the Soviet
Так
Union,
называемым
and believed that this would be understood by the so-called civilized West as an invitation for cooperation and
вот чего
association.
ожидала Россия.
He's clearly holding a grudge. He's still pretty mad about this.
That is what Russia was expecting, both from the United States and the so-called collective West as a whole.
В том числе и в Германии. Эгон Барр.
There were smart people, including in Germany, Egon Bahr, a major politician of the Social Democratic Party, who insisted in his personal conversations with the Soviet leadership on the brink of the collapse of the Soviet Union that a new security system should be established in Europe.
Помочь объединиться Германии, но
Help should be given to unify Germany, but a new system should be also established to include the United States, Canada, Russia, and other Central European countries.
A new
Yes.
NATO.
But NATO needs not to expand.
Все будет то же
That's
самое,
what he
как
said.
в условиях холодной войны.
If NATO expands, everything would be just the same as during the Cold War,
So he's briefly
only
getting into
closer
the
to
NATO
Russia's
thing.
borders.
Никто
That's
не
all.
послушал. Больше того, он рассердился как-то.
He was a wise old man, but no one listened to
Если,
him.
говорит, вы меня не
In
можете
fact,
слушать, я больше
he
вас
got
не
angry
буду.
once.
Рассердился на советское руководство.
If, he said, you don't listen to me, I'm never setting my foot in Moscow once again.
Но, тем не менее,
Everything happened just as he had said.
Well, of course, it did come true, and you've mentioned this many times. I think it's a fair point, and many in America thought
It's just funny. I'm just thinking of like how ironic it is that, to try to not have Ukraine go into NATO, they invade, or at least that's what I think he briefly touches upon here. That's what a lot of the world speculated. But by doing that, he ends up getting even more people into NATO, and it just had this reactionary effect.
that
Completely
relations
backfired.
between Russia and
With
the United
Finland,
States
and then I'm assuming Sweden at some point here soon. It sounds like the talks are getting pretty close.
would be fine with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, that the opposite happened. But you've never explained why you think that happened, except to say that the West fears a strong Russia, but we have a strong China the West does not seem very afraid of.
This was like this is like the absolute cringiest moment, I think, in the entire interview. Like, I don't know if Tucker Carlson said this. I don't even know why he said this. And, Putin makes him pay for it too, as he should, because I was like, that was extremely painful. That the U.S.
What
is
about
not
Russia,
afraid of
do
China.
you think, convinced policymakers they had to take it down?
Запад
Okay.
боится сильного Китая больше, чем сильной России.
The West is afraid of strong China more than it fears a strong Russia.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And that's crazy that he thinks that too. I mean, I don't know what the majority of Americans think, but I would say the American government is way more afraid of China than they are Russia.
Because Russia
Just because obviously they're putting a lot of resources into hurting Russia and making sure they hurt against Ukraine doesn't mean that they're still not way more fearful towards China. And he's going to explain why.
has 150 million people, and
Yeah.
China has 1.5 billion population, and its economy is growing by leaps and bounds, or 5% a year. It used to be even more. But that's enough for China. As Bismarck once put it, potentials are the most important. China's potential
Bismarck
is
was the-
enormous.
Imperial German leader, very influential.
It is the biggest economy in the world today in terms of purchasing power parity and the size of the economy. It has already overtaken the United States quite a long time ago, and it is growing at a rapid clip. Let's not talk about who is afraid of whom. Let's not reason in such terms. And let's get into the fact that after 1991, when Russia expected that it would be welcomed into the brotherly family of civilized nations, nothing like this happened. You tricked us. I don't mean you personally when I say you. Of course, I'm talking about the United States. The promise was that NATO would not expand eastward, but it happened
Good time to mention that the Soviet Union tried to enter NATO too. I think it was in the 50s. Obviously, they said no.
5 times. There were 5 waves of expansion. We tolerated all that. We were trying to persuade them. We were saying, please don't. We are as bourgeois now as you are. We are market economy and there is no communist party power. Let's negotiate. Moreover, I have also said this publicly before.
Был момент, когда
There was a moment when
серая кошка пробежала.
a certain rift started growing between us.
Помните, уступал?
Before that, Yeltsin came to the United States. Remember, he spoke in Congress and said the good words. God bless America. Everything he said were signals. Let us in. Remember the developments in Yugoslavia before the Yeltsin was lavished with praise? As soon as the developments in Yugoslavia started, he raised his voice in support of Serbs, and we couldn't but raise our voices for Serbs in their defense. I understand that there were complex processes underway there. I do.
Yeah, the
But
US,
Russia could
we're referencing the Yugoslavian wars during the 90s. Yeah, that was
not
crazy.
help raising its voice in support of Serbs, because Serbs are also a special and close to us nation, with Orthodox culture and so on.
Yeah.
It's a nation that has suffered so much for generations. Well,
Russia and Serbia have a
regardless,
close
what is
connection.
important is that Yeltsin expressed his support. What did the United States do? In violation of international law and the UN Charter, it started bombing Belgrade. It was the United States that let the
Yugoslavian
genie
wars.
out of the bottle.
И
Moreover, when Russia protested and expressed its resentment, what was said? The UN Charter and international law have become obsolete. Now everyone invokes international law, but at that time they started saying that everything was outdated. Everything had to be changed. Indeed, some things need to be changed, as the balance of power has changed.
I do believe there was a little bit of an arrogance from the U.S. side, for sure. After the Soviet Union collapsed, it's very clear with our actions after the 90s and the early 2000s that we were like, oh, we can do whatever we want. So this is,
But
yeah.
not in this manner. Yeltsin was immediately dragged through the mud, accused of alcoholism, of understanding nothing, of knowing nothing. He understood everything, I assure you. Well, I became president in 2000. I thought, okay, the Yugoslav issue is over, but we should try to restore relations. Let's reopen the door that Russia had
Putin has been in charge of Russia for a very, very long time.
tried to go through.
From 2000 to
moreover,
now. Now his official title wasn't always the same. It's like it was like prime minister and then president, and I'm not really sure how that aspect works, but it was like 2000, 2008, he was a certain title, and then 2008 to something else, he became a different title.
Said it publicly. I can reiterate.
But the de facto leader.
At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him,
He looks so weird back then. Did he get work done? His face looks very different.
Bill, do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, you know, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, you know, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now. You can ask him. I think he will watch our interview. He'll confirm it. I wouldn't have said anything like that.
I don't think he
hadn't
cares.
happened.
I don't think Bill Clinton cares at all anymore. His mind, I don't know.
Okay.
Were you
It's
sincere?
impossible now.
Would you have joined NATO?
Look, I asked the question, is it possible or not?
I thought
And
this
the
part's
answer I
interesting.
got was no. If I was insincere in my desire to find out what the leadership position
He was just trying to find out.
was,
But if he had said yes, would you have joined NATO?
if he had said yes, the process of rapprochement would have commenced, and eventually it might have happened if
Some
we
nice
had
political
seen some
dodging. I
sincere
don't know. I mean, it's just I wonder why he's politically dodging this question.
wish on the other side of our partners. But it didn't happen. Well,
He's just like, oh yeah, well if they let me in, then maybe I would begin the process of it. Like, okay,
oh, okay, fine.
Why do you think that is? Just to get to motive. I know you're clearly bitter about it. I understand. But why do you think
be careful there, Tucker. Careful with your words
the
there.
West rebuffed you then? Why the hostility? Why did the end of the Cold War not fix the relationship? What
man's gonna get
motivates
sent
this
to
from
the
your point of view?
Gulag here soon.
You said I was bitter about the answer. No, it's not bitterness. It's just a statement of fact. We're not bride and groom, bitterness, resentment. It's not about those kind of matters in such circumstances. We just realized we weren't welcome there, that's all. Okay, fine. But let's build relations in another manner. Let's look for common ground elsewhere. Why we received such a negative response, you should ask your leaders. I can only guess why. Too big a country with its own opinion and so on. And the United States, I've seen how issues are being resolved in NATO. I will give you another example now concerning Ukraine. The US leadership exerts pressure, and all NATO members obediently vote, even if they do not like something. Now, I'll tell you what happened in this regard with Ukraine in 2008, although it's being discussed. I'm not going to open a secret to you, say anything new.
2008.
Nevertheless, after that we tried to build relations in different ways. For example, the events in the Middle East, in Iraq.
I was
We
waiting
were
for him to
building
cover that.
relations with the United States in a very soft, prudent, cautious manner. I repeatedly raised the issue that the United States should not support separatism or terrorism in the North Caucasus.
но всё равно продолжали это делать.
but they continued to do it anyway.
И политическая
And political
поддержка,
support,
информационная
information
поддержка,
support, financial
финансовая
support,
поддержка, даже
even
военная
military support came from the United States and its satellites for terrorist groups in the Caucasus.
политические формирования
Yeah,
в
I once raised
North
this
of
issue with my
Georgia.
colleague, also the President of the United States. He says, "It's impossible. Do you have proof?" I said, "Yes." I was prepared for this conversation, and I gave him that proof.
Он посмотрел.
He looked at it, and you know what he said? "I apologize, but that's what happened." I'll quote.
Он говорит,
He says, "Well, I'm gonna kick their ass." We waited and waited for some response. There was no
Nothing.
reply.
я говорю директору,
I said to the FSB director, "Write to the CIA, what is the result of the conversation with
this is
President?"
interesting, like weird new take where now we're going after the U.S. and the ways that the West has wronged Russia. Still, the core of the conversation here. I don't understand how this justifies any action about the invasion or anything like that. It's kind of funny the way the obfuscation here is happening.
He wrote once, twice, and then we got a reply.
в архиве.
We have the answer in the archive. The CIA replied, "We have been working with the opposition in Russia. We believe that this is the right thing to do, and we will keep on doing it."
Смешно.
Just ridiculous.
Ну ладно, мы поняли, что
Well, okay. We realized that it was out of the question.
Forces in opposition to you. So you're saying the CIA is trying to overthrow your government.
Ну, конечно, имелось в виду в данном
Of
случае.
course, they meant in that particular case the separatists, the terrorists who fought with us in the Caucasus.
Они их называли.
That's who they called the opposition.
Это вот второй момент.
This is the
Третий
second
момент очень
point.
важный.
The third moment is a very important one. Is the moment when the US missile defense system was created.
Начало.
The beginning.
И мы долго
I like how he's going to
уговаривали.
mention.
We persuaded for a long time not to do it in the United States.
Меня пригласили в
Moreover,
отец Буша
after was invited by Bush Jr.'s father, Bush Sr., to visit his place on the ocean,
Там состоялась очень серьезная беседа.
I had a very serious conversation with President Bush and his team.
This is the
I proposed
the
that
dad.
the United States,
He was president 1988 to 1992.
Russia, and Europe jointly create a missile defense system that we believe,
которая, как мы считаем,
if created unilaterally, threatens our security, despite the fact that the United States officially said that it was being created against missile threats from Iran. That was the justification for the deployment of the missile defense system. I suggested working together, Russia, the United States, and Europe. They said it was very interesting. They asked me, "Are you serious?" I said, "Absolutely."
Я говорю, представь,
Let me ask, what year was this?
ну, я не помню, вот
I don't remember.
в интернете, когда я был.
It is easy to find out on the internet when I was in the USA at the invitation of Bush Sr. It is even easier to learn from someone I'm going to tell you about.
Мне сказали, это очень интересно.
I was told it was very interesting. I said, just imagine if we could tackle such a global strategic security challenge together.
Мир изменится.
The world will
Наверное,
change.
будут споры, наверное,
We'll probably have disputes, probably economic.
Again, this is funny. It's like I don't. All this stuff doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, it does matter in the in Russia's eyes, but the core of what we're talking about here, invading another sovereign country,
And even
don't really see
political
what
ones,
we're.
but we could drastically
what the
change
couple
the
of conversations
situation
going.
in the world.
этот
He
эфир,
says yes,
конечно,
and asks, "Are you serious?" I said, "Of course."
I wonder if, like, even if Russia gets all the things that they want in these situations, are they just not going to invade Ukraine? Like, if these three scenarios that he's bringing up, if these went Russia's way, then now Russia would not invade Ukraine. Like, was that the response?
We need to think about it, I'm told.
Вот в этот кабинет.
I said, "Go ahead, please." Then Secretary of Defense Gates, former director of CIA, and Secretary of State Rice came in here, in this cabinet, right here at this table. They sat on this table. Me, the foreign minister, the Russian defense minister on that side.
Министр обороны.
They said to me,
Они мне
"Yes, we have thought about it. We agree." I said, "Thank God, great.
Но
but with some exceptions.
So twice you've described US presidents making decisions and then being undercut by their agency heads. So it sounds like you're describing a system that's not run by the people who were elected in your telling.
именно так.
That's right.
В конечном
That's right.
итоге нас послали подальше. Я не буду
In the end, they just told us to get lost. I'm not going to tell you the
I'm not
details
surprised.
because I think it's incorrect. After all, it was confidential
Наше предложение
conversation.
было отклонено.
But our proposal was declined. That's a
Тогда,
fact.
именно тогда, я сказал,
It was
This stuff is very interesting, though. Even though, like I was saying, I don't know how it really relates.
right then when I said, look, but then
There's no doubt that both countries have been messing with the other in the last 30 years.
we will be forced to take countermeasures.
будем создавать такие
We will
удары.
create such strike systems that will certainly overcome missile defense systems.
And then he has to throw this
The answer
little dunk.
was, we are not doing this against you, and you do what you want, assuming that it is not against us, not against the
gonna
United
reference his-
States.
Гиперзвуковые системы.
I said,
He now
okay,
has something to
very
beat
well.
those missile defense
That's
systems.
the way it went. And we created hypersonic
Yeah, here it is.
systems with intercontinental range, and we continue to develop them. We are now ahead of everyone, the United States and the other countries, in terms of the development
gotta add
of
that.
hypersonic strike systems, and we
Well, I'm
are
sure there's-
improving them every day.
I'm sure there's already a
But
race
it wasn't
to
us. We proposed to go the other way,
To stop
and
that.
we were pushed
Теперь
back.
по поводу расширения НАТО на восток.
Now,
Ну,
about
обещали.
NATO's expansion to the
Никакого
east.
НАТО на восток.
Well, we were promised no NATO to the east, not an inch to the east, as we were told. And then what?
Что сказать? Ну,
They said, well, it's not enshrined on paper, so we'll expand.
5 расширений.
So there were
And this is-
5 waves
this
of
is where-
expansion.
a lot of the argument was supposed to.
The Baltic states, the whole of Eastern Europe, and so on.
И вот теперь прихожу к главному.
And now I come to the main thing. They have come to the Ukraine, ultimately. In 2008, at the summit in Bucharest, they declared that the doors for Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO were open. Now about how decisions are made there. Germany, France seem to be against it, as well as some other European countries. But then, as it turned out later, President Bush, and he's such a tough guy, a tough politician, as I was told later,
President
he
H.W.
exerted
Bush.
pressure on us and we had to
Он на
agree.
нас нажал.
It's ridiculous. It's like
This is
kindergarten.
2008.
Where are the guarantees? What kindergarten is this? What kind of people are these? Who are they?
Кто они такие?
You see, they were pressed, they agreed.
А потом они говорят,
And then they say, Ukraine won't be in the NATO, you know? I say, I don't know. I know you agreed in 2008. Why won't you agree in the future?
я говорю, а почему завтра?
Well,
Well,
at
they
this
pressed
point-
us then. I say, why won't they press you tomorrow? And you'll agree again.
С кем там
Well,
разговаривать?
it's
Я просто не
nonsensical.
понимаю. Мы готовы
Who's
к
there to
разговору.
talk
С
to?
кем?
I just don't
Где
understand.
гарантии?
We're ready to talk.
I mean, I don't blame his skepticism of not believing them, especially in 2008 after the multiple NATO expansions.
With whom?
Значит, начали осваивать
Where are the guarantees?
Что бы
None.
не было там. Я вам
So they
сегодня
started to
сказал,
develop the territory of Ukraine.
эта территория.
Whatever is there, I have told you the background, how
Politics
this
is dirty.
territory developed,
Politics is
what
dirty.
kind of
I mean, of course, we're hearing all of this as if Russia was this perfect little angel child. You know what I mean? Like there's so much that's being left out. This is just an interesting take from his perspective, from the perspective of Russia, 100% good, and the West, the U.S., 100% bad.
relations there were with Russia. Every second or third person there has always
But
had
of course, he is not going to mention a single thing that maybe he did dirty. You know, he was playing dirty
Some ties
about
with
or
Russia.
things like that. He
And
was a
during
bit
the
dirty.
elections in already
with political
independent,
times.
sovereign Ukraine, which gained its independence as a result of the Declaration of Independence. And by the way, it says that Ukraine is a neutral state, and in 2008, suddenly the doors or gates to NATO were open to it. Oh, come on. This is not how we agreed.
Все,
Now, all the presidents that have come to power in Ukraine,
опирались на
they relied on electorate with a good attitude to Russia in one way or the other.
это юго-восток Украины.
This is the southeast of Ukraine. This is a large number of people.
И перебить этот электорат.
And it was very difficult to dissuade this electorate, which had a positive attitude towards Russia.
К власти пришел
Viktor Yanukovych came to power, and how?
40 million people.
The first
in
time he
Ukraine?
won after President Kuchma, they organized a third round, which is not
Why is his eyes so focused in like
provided
this?
for in the constitution of Ukraine.
госпереворот.
This is a coup d'etat.
Себе
Just imagine someone in the United States wouldn't like the outcome.
между...
In 2014.
Нет.
Before that.
Нет, нет.
No, this was before that. After President Kuchma, Viktor Yanukovych won the elections. However, his opponents did not recognize that victory.
seen that guy's
The
face in
US
44
supported the opposition, and the third round was scheduled.
США поддержали
What is this? This is a coup.
третий тур.
The US supported it, and the winner of the third round came to power.
Государственный
Yeah, this is where
Imagine
things are
if
getting
in
very
the
political.
US something was not to someone's liking, and the third
At this point, it's less and less about history, but I did want to break down the historical part of it, which is a pretty funny aspect of the whole interview. But like I said, I just really don't agree with the premise of his argument, but I still found it fascinating to see from the leader of Russia, him breaking down his own history. I know some of that stuff is really hard to follow along. I don't even blame you if you didn't follow along. That probably took so many people out of the interview. Funny enough, I'm sure he was not thinking about that at all. But if your plan was to grab American ears, I definitely would not have started with a 35-minute discussion about Russian history. But anyways, see you next time.